think we have to keep in mind that Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin have a very close personal bond, which has been developed over the past decade of both leaders being in power. President Xi has at times referred to President Putin as his best friend. Xi's relationship with Putin is as close as any world leaders can be. They share much in common in terms of their own worldviews, which includes a shared set of grievances about the United States. They have common concerns over the way in which they view the United States as exercising its power and influence in the world, which, in their view, often undermines the security interests of their own countries. China and Russia also have a strong strategic partnership that has arguably become even closer during the last year of war in Ukraine. As Moscow has become more isolated internationally, it has also become more dependent on Russia. Xi's visit to Moscow will demonstrate very clearly, in my view, that the strategic partnership remains strong and that China is not likely to abandon Russia anytime soon, despite the intense international pressure facing Moscow. Xi Jinping likely assesses that the United States and the Western powers will continue to pressure China over its support of Russia, regardless of whether he goes to Moscow to meet with President Putin. So making this visit is not likely to change in any substantial way the pressure that China feels from the Western powers in the United States. President Xi will try to reduce international criticism of his visit to Moscow by arranging a subsequent phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. In this way, he can frame his visit to Moscow as part of China's broader diplomatic efforts toward finding a political solution in Iran, similar to the recently announced Saudi-Iran deal, which China brokered. However, de-escalating the active war in Ukraine will be a much harder task. The process to restore relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran had been underway for 2 years prior to the deal, and both sides had their own incentives for wanting to complete a deal. With regard to the Ukraine conflict, neither side appears ready for such a process. So I would expect President Xi on his visit to Moscow to be more in listening mode. I don't expect President Xi to pressure President Putin to end his brutal war in Ukraine. More likely, Xi will be more in passive mode to listen to Putin, and then to convey some of what he hears to President Zelensky during their call, in addition to reviewing some of the principles from China's position paper on Ukraine. And in that regard, it is unlikely that China will be able to repeat what we saw with the Saudi Arabia-Iran deal, or make much tangible progress in moving the two parties toward a political resolution. Many in the United States and Europe see China leaning toward Russia more than China's public statements about neutrality would let on. Frankly, what is surprising is not that President Xi is visiting Moscow, but that he waited more than a year into the war in Ukraine to do so. It may not be a coincidence that President Xi is going to Moscow precisely at the start of his unprecedented third term as China's leader. Observers will be analyzing the public statements that emerge from the meeting between President Xi and President Putin to see any signs of distancing or, more likely in my view, further strengthening of the China-Russia partnership.